if I put $100 on my desk here, I can wake up every day and look at $100 and I can tell myself I still have $100 when in fact the purchasing power of that 100 is eroding. I just can't see it. If we had some giant visual indicator of how our purchasing power is being zapped on a daily basis, it would be way more evident to people.
Hey everyone, so good to be back with you. Chris Martinson, Peak Prosperity. Big interview today. This is going to be awesome. Really looking forward to this. It's been too long in the coming, too long in the making. I have no good excuse for why it's taken this long. But today we're talking with Chris Irons of Quoth the Raven. Great individual, great writer. Hopefully you've been following on Twitter, on Substack, other places. But man, we are going to burn the bridges down today. We're going to talk about COVID. And we're going to talk about monetary policy. And if you don't understand how those two things come together, you really should, because everything connects to everything else. Chris, so good to be talking with you today.
How are you?
Good.
Intro. I better take a sip of my coffee if we. Sounds like we've got a lot to do.
We do. Yes. No. Get a smooth throat. So, COVID. So at the time of this recording, where are we here? We're in June, early June of 2024. Well, the Congress has just started to rip Fauci and Morenz, a couple of new ones. I haven't seen anybody taking down the other cast of odious characters, the FDA person, the CDC lady. There's a lot of people that could be taken down in this. Trump too, by the way, running his Operation Warp Speed and locking us all down. But I'm just wondering what your take is on this, because we saw Fauci cry tears because his own family had received his death threats, and that made him cry.
I also saw him sitting in his office at one point with painted pictures of himself on all three walls that were surrounding him. So,
bit of a narcissist.
I guess you got to take the good with the bad, right? If you're going to be a public figure.
He is. So this is the thing, the press gave him this free pass because I thought we were all about rainbow flags on crosswalks, and it was all about that. And Fauci is the guy who was personally responsible for blocking the use of Bactrim to save AIDS patients. Instead, he wanted this AZT thing from one of his pharma buddies, and they killed at least tens of thousands, but maybe hundreds of thousands of people by withholding appropriate treatment. It's just a perfect echo for ivermectin and what happened in COVID. How did the press completely 100% avoid talking about his horrifying history?
Well, that's very easy. I mean, the press was a wholly owned subsidiary of the drug manufacturers throughout the course of the pandemic. And so I wrote an article on my Substack called The Unforgivable Ivermectin Swindle. And if you look in that article, there's a YouTube compilation, probably taken down at this point, but a compilation of all of the different mainstream media shows with all of their bumpers before they go to commercial saying this program being brought to you by Pfizer. They were everywhere. The pharmaceutical companies not only sponsored everything in the mainstream media, they were sponsoring tennis tournaments, they were sponsoring, the Pfizer logo was stamped everywhere. And I think they knew that, they had this opportunity for a giant, massive, ungodly cash grab. And so in order to do that, there were certain entities that you have to buy off, and the mainstream media was one of those. That's not to say that the media probably wasn't also taking their cues from the White House or from, in the government as well, because both parties, Trump at the onset of the vaccine and then the Biden administration, had their feet in the vaccination camp. And it was just kind of funny because you remember when Trump was president, Kamala Harris went on stage and said, I'd never take a Trump vaccine, and then Biden got elected and it was everybody needs to get vaccinated right now. And it was interesting to watch it kind of be used as a political football, but
whoa, hey, hi, everybody. I just want to bust in here real quick just to let everybody know, because this is a different format than we've been following for the past several months. So I've got this great interview going with Chris Irons of Quoth the Raven, and part 2 of this is going to be very different. And I'm going to be talking about this for my subscribers back at Peak Prosperity. This is really important. I just need to make sure everybody's aware of that, because these topics right now, not getting enough coverage. We have to talk about them and why they're coming. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that. And all of that leads to potentially this. I'm back to the Dwizabin language here, because there's certain things that you can't discuss out here on certain platforms without getting the things all angry at you there. I don't know. You tell me why this would be such a sensitive topic. I think we all know. So this is a very real possibility. I need everybody to know about it. For anybody who is not a subscriber at Peak Prosperity, we're going to make it easy. Of course, we have a 30-day no questions asked money back guarantee. And today and for this rest of this weekend, we'll be doing a 20% off. So you can try us out for 20% off. Use the code PEAK20 to get 20% off. And we're so confident that you're going to love it and find so much value in this kind of reporting that you'll stick around. So with that, now we go back to our regular programming. Thank you.
Even back when the vaccination campaigns first started, before we even had any serious skepticism, at least I didn't. You were ahead of the curve as far as I'm concerned on COVID. I remember coming to the COVID thing early and raising a lot of questions very early, before the stock market crashed, before we had more than a dozen cases in the US. And you were one of the only people out there that had already kind of taken on talking about it. When you go back that far, I remember there was uncertainty as to what the nature of the virus was exactly. We had questioned a lot of the data that came out of China. Certainly I did, being somebody that had experience working with Chinese nationals. I felt like I had my finger on the pulse of the Chinese Communist Party a little bit better than most people. I knew not to trust their data. It was only after we started getting data out of South Korea, Italy, and our allies that you could start to see like the infection mortality rates start to kind of level off. And you knew we were getting some objective data that we could trust a little bit further. But, going as far back as the beginning of the vaccination campaign, to me, even at a point where I wasn't, now obviously I'm far more skeptical than I am accepting. But even then, the style of the campaign that was launched onto the American public, which started as a very innocuous sounding, we have new vaccines to stop this novel virus, and people that are immunocompromised and the elderly, this will be a way to stop transmissibility, and this is really going to be, the clouds are going to kind of part ways here, and this is going to be the path back to a normal life. To go from that to Bill de Blasio, bribing people with cheeseburgers, which in and of itself is insane, because nobody was making the case that natural immunity or just being healthy in general would probably give you a fighting chance against the virus. The campaign was just such a Soviet-style propaganda campaign that even at a point when I was relieved that we had vaccines, things very quickly, the gates started to swing very quickly in the other direction, to becoming very skeptical about how obsessive the government was in trying to get everybody vaccinated. And immediately, I started to notice little things. The first thing was, out in the neighborhood where I used to go jog, somebody had put up a billboard, and it was a picture of a young kid with his grandmother. And it was saying the kid can finally get back to his normal life now and hockey practice because he's gotten vaccinated. And when I spoke to my own doctor about getting vaccinated, the one thing he said to me is, look, we don't have long-term safety data yet. You're 37 years old. You go running, you go to jiu-jitsu, you're in great shape, you're in decent shape. You probably don't have to worry about it. Then we got the information that we started to get some real trustworthy objective data that children were disproportionately less affected by COVID than they were by the flu. Not as much. It wasn't as dangerous as the flu. In fact, the data that we received was that children were disproportionately less affected than they were with the flu.
Rounding to the nearest thousandth of a percent, it was 0.
Right. And so to watch the vaccine campaign then start to encompass people that really it didn't make sense. And then I started, pregnant women was another group, right? Young children.
Wasn't tested on them.
Correct. then you start to think about, I think about what my doctor told me. Okay, well, we don't have long-term safety data, and we're not going to have it for a while, for as long as long-term you want it to be post the vaccine being released. So even now, we can only have 3 years worth of safety data, whatever.
Which isn't good.
And you think about that, and you think about, okay, why would they be pushing this on children when it doesn't need to be pushed on children? Flu vaccines aren't pushed on children. You're not taking your 2-year-old to CVS to get a flu shot. I mean, unless you're one of these insane, people. But most people with common sense aren't doing that. So then you start thinking like, all right, well, who's calling the shots here? How could this possibly be a good idea? And that was a huge wake-up call. And early on, it's easy to say now, but early on in 2021, when really you had basically everybody had taken this deck of cards of information and kind of just spread it out over the table, and your job was to hurriedly kind of turn over pieces of data and assemble what type of hand we were holding in real time. It was difficult in 2021. But even then, it seemed stunning. So to be frank with you, it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right the way it went down. So now you make this analog, to return back to your point here. You make this analog about, well, why was there such a campaign against ivermectin and against hydroxychloroquine? Another thing, 2 seconds of research on ivermectin, and you knew immediately it was on the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. It was essentially as safer than like amoxicillin. I mean, things that we've been using ubiquitously. I mean, the safety data on ivermectin is unrivaled, basically, for, no matter what cause you're taking it for. They say, well, it may not be safe to take it for COVID. What that sounds like is if you take it, you might die from the drug. What they're saying in lawyer speak is we're not sure about the efficacy for this particular indication. However, you could probably take this every day for the rest of your life and be fine. That's how safe it is. So there were a lot of carefully worded lawyer speak when it came to that stuff to try to discourage people from taking it. Then you had the media like CNN who came out and just lied. They just purposely lied. They never.
Well, now we know something. Hold on. Let me back up here, because we just found out that the NIH, I don't even understand how it is that you take public scientists, pay them my money, and then they get royalties for anything that they discover inside of that. So they just got paid $728 million, 2021, 2022. A big chunk of that's Pfizer and Moderna money, we can be sure.
Right.
Okay. So now it's all the way back to that really grubby thing. There was this EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, right, which required that there be no other available treatments. And
Correct.
now we know that, when I first started talking, my YouTube channel went from like, I didn't put a lot of effort into it, went from like 5,000 subs or whatever, 50, whatever it was, and skyrocketed. And then it just got slammed. And I can point on the chart to the day. That was the first day I talked about chloroquine phosphate. I didn't know about hydroxychloroquine, but there was an early report out of China, March 2020, that they were having success with chloroquine phosphate. I was like, okay, so I reported it. It's just data.
Right.
And then I found that there was a 2005 study done by the NIH showing that chloroquine phosphate works against SARS, classic SARS, right? That's when I got slammed, right? So it wasn't even that Trump had said something about it and the media got its Trump derangement syndrome booties on and anything. Somebody was ready to take that story out instantly, because that's the moment my channel got just smashed. It just got like a ceiling put on it. That was a no-no. So that means somebody somewhere within the entire ecosystem of YouTube and pharma and NIH already knew that they were sensitive about chloroquine phosphate,
if people
and
start
shut
talking
it down
about
immediately, right? What
Yeah,
are
well,
we
you know,
what
look,
are we
that
dealing with when it's at that level? Like, we're not dealing with like some pharma money and YouTube's worried about something for advertising.
That was the conspiracy theory back in 2021, was they need to shut you up about hydroxychloroquine and they need to shut you up about ivermectin so that they could utilize the EAU. And now looking back, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's the leading cause of reason. I mean, it would be applying Occam's razor 99 times out of 100. That's the answer you're going to arrive at. Not that, anybody on your channel doesn't need to know this. You're a grown adult. You probably know to some degree. The answer is pretty much always follow the money. But that was and I remember piecing it together in 2021. And I even remember Rogan talking about it and a couple other places talking about it, where it was widely accepted that that was kind of still the conspiracy theory. But I remember a bunch of people saying that, hey, well, if you want to circle the square here and explain why they would be potentially suppressing ivermectin, which, again, if you had done 2 seconds worth of research, it was inconceivable. Even if it worked on 1 out of every 500 people, it would be more than what we had on the table at that point. But it was inconceivable at that point that would be the answer. There's some big grand conspiracy, but now, oh boy, 3 or 4 years removed, looking back, it's very easy to see the mainstream media was captured. The pharmaceutical companies were paying who they needed to pay to get their programs sponsored. Sponsored programs aren't going to push any other line than the one that their sponsors want. I mean, this is just basic blocking and tackling of like how money gets shit done, to be honest with you. And
let me ask you your take on this, because this is really
sure.
Like, how does this happen? So does the editor of Rolling Stone wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to task a journalist with making up a completely false story about ivermectin? Remember, gunshot victims in Oklahoma can't get care because the halls were packed with ivermectin overdose victims, right? It was complete
they used a
bullshit.
Fake
photograph, right? How does that actually happen? Like how does that happen? Because the journalists know.
I think it's a combination of capture, like I'm talking about. The pharmaceutical industry is putting money at work, and I also think that there are a far larger group of people out there than we would care to recognize who are generally scared shitless as human beings, who want their talking points from somebody else. They want somebody to do their critical thinking for them. They're malleable. They're chicken shit. They're afraid to draw their own conclusions, and they just do better listening to the powers that be. There's a whole group of them out there. I see them in finance. They're all over the world. People that happily take their talking points. People that if you say, if you're out on a paddleboard in the middle of the ocean, you need to wear a mask. People that say that makes sense. They would rather just listen to it and do it than do a half of a second of critical thinking and say this makes absolutely no sense at all. And then you get this giant kind of mass psychosis, like which we saw, where, people are getting beaten and shot and tased and arrested and, tackled while they're jogging in the park for not wearing a mask outdoors. It was lunacy. It was absolute lunacy. So I think it's a combination of, a trust, not just a trust in the government, but a willingness to surrender their sovereignty over their own mind and their liberty and their freedom, and kind of hand that to the powers that be for whatever reason, and a lack of critical thinking combined with a lot of powerful people putting a lot of money to work. Otherwise, it's very difficult to explain. I mean, when you talk about something like what happened on CNN, where they covered ivermectin as though it was a veterinary drug and nothing else. All right, when you watch that coverage, that is appalling. I was writing this article. I wrote this article last September, The Unforgivable Ivermectin Swindle. And, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but that's just lying. It's just outright, bold-faced lying. And that's why nobody trusts the media anymore. That's why your YouTube channel has 500,000 subscribers. That's why people are listening to me. Look, I live here in a 400 square foot studio apartment. Okay, I have a car that is badly in need of a rear bumper. I am not the, Mr. sign of like wealth and great decisions. I'm better suited to be crushing beer cans on my head for the most part. But the point is, people are so desperate for a molecule of truth and actual reason that they've come to people like you. I mean, you have a medical degree, which I don't have.
Well, Here's how bad this is. This is where I can't understand this except to say it's not organic. We must be in the grips of some mind virus that's installed by some weaponized cognitive warfare machinery that the deep state's been working on since MK Ultra. I don't know. My organizing philosophy for this has always been I trust Charlie Munger. One thing, you show me the incentive, I will show you the outcome.
Right.
When people's paychecks are on the line, Chris, they always straighten up and fly right. They always do, except for now, right?
Yeah. Well, that's
Washington Post. I mean, like the Washington Post sounds alarm over dwindling audience and heated staff meeting. People are not reading your stuff. Let's not sugarcoat it. We're losing large amounts of money. They are about to lose their jobs. And CNN, who you just talked about, same thing. How are they not going, wow, we are producing something people don't want or don't want to pay for?
Well, because
so we should do something different.
They're sitting around congratulating themselves about how smart they are, handing out Nobel Prizes and other such awards, with
Pulitzers.
Pulitzers, all the way down to the Grammys and the Tony Awards. Oh, Sean Penn made a statement. Isn't he so You know what I mean? Sean Penn's going to tell me how to manage my own body. I don't think so. The point is, like, they're just sitting around and the train has left the station. And I wrote another article some years back called "The Mainstream Media is Losing the Fight of Its Life, All Thanks to Joe Rogan." And the point was that the internet and podcasting has enabled people to have a voice. It has enabled a much freer market when it comes to where you want to choose to get your information and choose to get your news than has ever been available. Back in the day when I was a kid, when you were a kid, there were 3 television stations, or there were 20 television stations, and you had ABC, NBC, CBS, you had ESPN for sports, and you had the Weather Channel. And that was it. And if you wanted your news, you had to go to CNN because they were one of the only ones out there. You had to go to ABC. You had to try to find the lesser of, 3 or 4 evils. I also don't think that the media institutions were as corrupted back then, but nowadays I think that the media has become far more left-leaning, or they've maintained their leftist stance, and the left in general has moved further to the left. And so the talking points that they're defending and the nonsense and bullshit that they are standing for has just become far more bizarre. I was talking to Matt Taibbi about this on my podcast, trying to ask him, hey, Matt, like, did we just get old and turn into old miserable or are things...
Question I have.
Right, or are things really different now? Has the calibration of the right and left really changed? And he agrees with me that it has. But back then we only had those choices, right? So now you have the internet, which even if Google and YouTube want to censor people and take down your podcasts and whatever, you have these free market. Like, I write on Substack, okay? I chose to move my stuff to Substack because I knew that they were going to, allow more than what other people would allow in terms of free speech. And to me, that's really important. I'm not out there saying bold, ridiculous, insane shit. I'm not spreading, hate-filled, vile vitriol at all. I'm just dancing around the fringe of issues because I think it's important, because oftentimes that's where the truth lies. And there's nobody in power who has an interest in delivering the truth to us when it fits outside of their narrative. So this has somewhat leveled the playing field, very similar to kind of what Bitcoin is doing in finance and what gold, I think, can also do in finance. Returning some power back to the people, giving them a choice of who they want to listen to, enabling people like myself who would never in a million years have a platform on an ABC or a CNN or a Fox News, to go on and offer my opinion, or somebody like yourself. And so it has kind of democratized this. And meanwhile, this new offshoot of the media machine, alternative media and internet-based media, is in the left lane and has just blown past the legacy media, who did us a favor because they were either way. But what they've done over the last 4 years has accelerated the process. When you look at the Hunter Biden laptop story that was just entered into evidence in a federal court today or yesterday as his, and that was, 50 former intelligence agencies told Politico it was bullshit. The New York Post, you want to give somebody a Pulitzer? They should have gotten the Pulitzer for that story.
Yeah, they should have.
That was a massive story revealing not just Hunter Biden's personal life, which I could care less about, to be honest with you, but the fact that Biden was on the dole from China. Everything that he had been accusing.
And that the FBI had sat on that information and had no interest in investigating that laptop from hell in all of its 185 crimes or whatever was sort of revealed on there, which they should have an interest in, including some federal felonies and all of that. But yeah, down the dole, like this was absolutely critical, vital information that the nation needed to have from a security standpoint, from an election standpoint, and the FBI hid it.
And
like they do.
Back in the day, if you had a Gulf of Tonkin incident or you had an Operation Northwoods or whatever, it would be 10 years later, there would be a limited hangout. 15 years later, there would be a little bit more. And 20 years later, eventually, it will have kind of homogenized itself in the zeitgeist of everything. And everybody one day just kind of walks around and accepts the fact that, the Gulf of Tonkin was made up. But now the internet has sped that whole process up, and alternative media has sped that up. So the lies from 2020, that check has come due right now. The Hunter Biden lies, that check has come due now. The ivermectin lies, that check has come due now with Dave Smith, just neutering Chris Cuomo on the PBD podcast the other day. Absolutely demolished and pulverized him. And in my opinion, still didn't give him as much shit as he should have or whatever. Brian Stelter is out of a job. Big surprise there, right? CNN's ratings are in the toilet. The Washington Post is bleeding subscribers. So the time in between bullshitting everybody and the consequences you have to pay for it has gotten much shorter. And the internet and alternative media has kind of catalyzed that. And that's why, people like Jeffrey Tucker, that's not his name. I'm sorry. What's the guy's name from CNN? The guy who heads up. It doesn't matter. That's why you have one day where everything appears to be going fine, and Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo and Brian Stelter are leading, the integrity in the news. And literally they wake up the next day and those guys are all fired and the ratings are the lowest they've ever been because people are tired of it. They are tired of it. And, I think that is merging with this kind of populist movement that we're seeing around the world. And I think here in the United States too. And I think people want real answers and they want real accountability, and they're going to make that heard with their votes because like Joe Rogan said the other day, at the end of the day, the government is just people. The government's just people and the people are just people. And there's many 100 million more average common citizens than there are people calling the shots at the top of government and in the media. And so I'm old school, Chris. I believe propaganda should be free, right? They should just put that poster up on the wall and I shouldn't have to pay for that, right? So the idea that you're going to have propaganda as a subscription model, sorry, WAPO, that's why your rag is failing, right? People, we're tired of it. We've been gaslit. Look what we've just had to endure. First off, 4 years of enduring this so-called Biden presidency, which again, the one question I've never been able to get answered to my satisfaction is who is actually running the White House, right? Nobody really seems to know, right? I can tell you who
big mystery. I can tell you who it isn't, right? So let's start there. We know it's not this guy. And so just today, the Wall Street Journal finally does their own limited hangout saying, behind closed doors, there's some concerns that Biden's showing signs of slipping. I'm like, no, honey. We've seen that out in public in front of the doors, right? On the podiums, when he falls down the stairs, when he falls up the stairs, when he shakes hands with invisible people, talks to dead people in the room, says, right? Yeah. We've seen it all. It's been out there, and we're supposed to pretend in this simulacrum of democracy that there's our democracy that's worth defending, right? What a bizarre thing. This is how are we even here? I'm really...
Who you gonna believe, Rachel Maddow or your lion eyes? She's telling you he's 100% competent and lucid and with it. And meanwhile, he can't put a sentence together. He can't walk off or on a stage. He can't walk up, but he can't do stairs.
But you and I both know that if you said, "Hey, Rachel, your private plane, the pilot is Joe Biden," he walks on. She's getting off that plane right away. We all know that, right?
The latest absolute insult to everybody's intelligence, whether you're on the right or the left. The left may not notice it. They may just bend over and say, thank you, sir, may I have another? But it should be an insult to their intelligence, is this idea that, oh, well, Biden's just going to step in and close the border now. Shit's getting real now, Chris. He's going to sign these executive orders, and Mayorkas is on TV saying, well, yeah, we've spent 3 years trying to secure the border, when it was only 3 years ago that they were bragging about undoing over 100 different, they issued around 100 different executive orders that Trump had put in place to secure the border. I don't care if you're on the left or on the right. If you can't see that there's a border crisis in this country, you're blind as a bat. Even if it helps you, even if they're importing immigrants, to employ them as voters or whatever the plan is here behind the scenes that, these idiots are using to justify letting millions of people, undocumented people, into the country every year. Even if you want to support that, say you're a Democrat and you're like, all right, yeah, we need more Democratic votes, whatever. You have to at least objectively admit to the fact that border crossings have gone completely out of control the day since Joe Biden took office. It was a premeditated, purposeful strike down of the border policies that Trump had when he was in office. And now, and even going so far as to take down the wall and to go to war with the state of Texas over whether or not they can protect their border. To do nothing is one thing.
They flew them in on planes.
Then to employ government resources specifically to be counterintuitive. Why would either side of the aisle want to tell Texas that they can't protect their border? Why would either side want to take down the wall and sell it for pennies on the dollar once it's already up? Sometimes the idea of being counterintuitive, not just doing nothing, not sitting on their hands, but actively coming in and funding, which means we're paying for it, funding regression is baffling. And now you have Biden 5 months before the election I'm going to sign executive orders. We got to do something about the border. And Mayorkas, who is a reprehensible human being, in my opinion. I've watched some of his congressional testimony. Absolutely reprehensible. Sit there and duck and weave and bob and, try to deflect responsibility for 3 years to come out and say, oh, yeah, well, we've been working on it. We've been working on it for 3 years. It's just sickening. And to go back to what we're saying about truth and consequences and the window of those closing as a result of alternative media, similar things here, right? You see kind of what you're being told versus what the action was 3 years ago. And what's happening is not only is it bankrupting legacy media because people have had enough, but in the same vein, people that were centrists and independents, look, you have the people that are always going to be left, the people that are always going to be right. So the war is fought in the middle. The war is fought in between the centrists and the people that are on the left of the right side and on the right of the left side. Those are the viewers that CNN needs, and they don't have anymore. And those are the votes that both sides of the aisle needs that, I'm predicting is what they're not going to get, short of some type of other, nonsense. But that's another discussion for another day. So those are the votes that they need. And they're not going to get them because they have no finesse. The liberals have no finesse. It's like this thing with the 34 counts of falsifying business records. If they had charged him with one count and they had talked about it for a second and said, all right, well, some justice has been done here and whatever, all right. It's insane that it happened anyways. But if you're a strategist, beating it senselessly, immersive, he's a convicted felon and 34 counts. We're talking about $100,000, okay, which is an immaterial amount of money, something that happened over a decade ago, something that Bill Clinton did, essentially paid somebody for their silence. It's so obvious to everybody that they're just going after him for political purposes. It's so blindingly obvious that they're losing the votes that they were hoping to get from it. And so it just shows a total lack of finesse on their part.
Well, it's more than that. It's this inability. So they live in a world of ideology that's more important to them than the reality. So I'm doing an us them story, and it's kind of a this that, and I don't think that's totally true, because I can point to a lot of Republicans who, some of whom have eye patches, come from Texas, who I think are complete asshats. Okay, so. But leaving that aside, this isn't a left-right thing, but I have noticed there's a strain of people who can't connect back to reality. So it's like, oh, we're going to make the shoplifting limit $950. What could happen? Well, more shoplifting. Well, what should we do? Raise it higher, right? They can't like connect cause and effect, which is why I was so immune to the idea of them saying correlation doesn't prove causation, man. I'm like, oh God, from you of all people, right? So they do this stuff against Trump. It makes him stronger, like Obi-Wan Kenobi. They've struck him down, and he's stronger than ever, right? $200 billion fundraise. So, and again, all they're going to think to do, though, is do more of the same, because that's what I've been watching them do. More of the same is how they get where they think they want to go, and they never seem to notice they're getting further from where they want to go. So San Francisco now is an unlivable city.
Correct.
Right?
It's over.
It's over.
They have overanalyzed and intellectualized their way back to the
abstract.
Stone Age. You know,
it's abstractions, not reality. You know, we need reality. So that's what I think you and I represent. We're over here going, hey, can we wave a flag for reality? You know, get a little something going. Rah, rah.
Well, I just wrote about this, right? And I wrote this article. I'll send you the link. Maybe you can put it in the podcast description. It's just called Lacking Finesse, Lacking Mindfulness. It's from June 2nd. It's free to read. It's on my Substack. It's called Fringe Finance. I'll send you the link. But
we're going to post that up. That's posted on my site too. We're going to post that up. That's a great article.
Perfect.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
So the point of the article is that basically goes to exactly what you're saying, which is they know where they want to get, and they don't care how they get there. You know, so they've adopted the ideology first, right? Which is whatever. Double mastectomies for 14-year-old girls are normal. Or, you know, we should be wearing 3 masks when we're outside jogging through Central Park. Or, you know, whatever other lunacy is coming from the left. They've tethered themselves to the ends. And the means with which they get there, it doesn't matter. And that's where they're losing people. You know, academia now has turned into this machine that over-intellectualizes and over-jargonizes things that sometimes have very simple solutions and presents them back as some type of like, you know, faux intellectual line of reasoning that the normal people would never be able to understand. It's like the shoplifting thing, right? You know, if you want people to stop shoplifting, arrest them. That's the answer. You don't need I don't need a focus group. I don't need a PhD. I don't need a study. I don't need a thing on race relations. I don't need a thing on socioeconomic stuff. If you don't want people to break the law, put consequences in place. You don't do things that encourage more breaking the law. Think of what kind of a mental pretzel you need to have twisted yourself in. Think of how long you have to sit around and whack off other intellectuals, right? And have everybody tell each other that you're all right and you're all geniuses. Think of how much of that you have to do to arrive at an idea like segregating college campuses is a way to fight racism. Just what needs to happen mentally? How much postmodern anti-patriarchy, colonization, whatever, how much Jacques Derrida do you have to read in order to twist yourself back in that pretzel? If it's okay with you, I would like to read you this little thing that I wrote here. Is that okay? Not the whole
sure
thing,
is.
but this one paragraph, because it's a lengthy article, but I wrote about basically, why I think people on the left have arrived at this idea that overanalyzation and over-intellectualization of things, it empowers them. It allows them to say, oh, I'm smart, because I've looked at this at an angle that you haven't. Basically, the point is not every problem needs to be looked at through a microscope. Again, it's like the voter ID issue, right? Like, if you want to make sure every vote's accounted for, you just have everybody bring their ID, and then you know who's voted and who hasn't. That's it. Full story, end of stop. I mean, there's nothing. There doesn't need to be anything complicated there. There doesn't need to be anything about, whether it's racist or whether it's socioeconomic. Here you go. So I just wrote While I've always thought the term Trump derangement syndrome was idiotic, and the left isn't doing themselves any favor, the hyperbolic term alludes to a level of cognitive distortion where all bearings and calibrations of what is right and wrong fall by the wayside of an obsession to basically fix the problem of Donald Trump, meaning the moral compass, the basic fundamentals, they're gone because it's tunnel vision on get Trump, right? Taking a criminal charge that would otherwise not have been prosecuted and then turning it into a legal circus act that could see the leading candidate for president theoretically serve prison time. It not only shows an unhealthy pattern of obsession with fixing the problem the left erroneously believes they have the solution to, it shows a complete and total lack of finesse and mindfulness that would, I think, in my opinion, would work well to revive the Democratic Party. And so, like him or not, Donald Trump brings with him a host of simple policy solutions that aren't overthought. And as an aside, you can say what you want. You can call him an idiot. You can say Trump's a moron. He's a hard-headed businessman. He doesn't pay vendors. Want that, build that, this good, that bad. But my point here is sometimes it really is that simple. It's right or wrong. It's good versus evil. And so I write, he brings with him many simple policy solutions that aren't overthought at a point where we don't have the luxury of any more time for intellectual masturbation or unnecessary complexity. Close the border to stop illegal immigration, put more police on the street and remove lenient DAs to tackle petty crime, and drill holes in the ground to bring oil prices down. The left wants to argue the fact that Trump is a caveman with caveman ideologies, but the truth is they have overthought us so far off the path of reason that sometimes the solutions our nations require really are that simple. So easy a caveman could do it. Thank you very much. I will take it out.
Thank you. All right. I think you got your finger on something which is at least part of the left. I won't put them all under this umbrella, but some of them, they've attached their identity to being smart. They're intellectuals. And of course, They love the idea that the Trumpies are toothless wonders. They're deplorables. They're basically subhuman. So they've categorized themselves, and their sense of belonging and inclusion is all around having this intelligence. And Trump just comes in like a wrecking ball and speaks in non-intelligent sounding sorts of ways, although there is a wisdom to what he does that's, I think, eludes them because they can't get past the veneer of the exterior of it. I think they're just defended, that he basically exposes that you don't need a Harvard PhD to get ahead in life, that in fact there's too many of them right now, like, dude, so here's the thing. I actually had a Harvard recent grad wanted to intern with my shop here at Peak Prosperity. And I didn't even think twice. I turned him down. There's not a chance in the world I could take the risk of trying to figure out if this was a good person or a bad person. But I just knew that the level of programming he'd gone through in that program was not something that I wanted to wrestle with because I just don't have time. We're moving too fast here and we got a good team. But I've gotten to the point now where I actually see a college degree is an impediment for a lot of folks, depending on where they went. When did that happen? That's just like 3 years ago. I'd have been like, ooh, a Harvard grad wanted to come be part of my operation. Now I'm like, ew.
Yeah, it's funny. And looking back on, I was a lit major in college. I graduated college in 2000. I got my undergrad in 2005. And just looking back on some of the things that we were reading, which I never, you're going through college and you don't really think about, you just think, all right, I'm getting a wide breadth of knowledge here. And you don't really think about really how crazy it is. But I remember reading Derrida and taking a course on deconstructionism, which was essentially we would take a narrative from some Native American in the 18th century, right, which would basically be like, I shot and killed a buffalo, ate him for dinner, and lit a fire, and I went to bed. And that's what it would say. And then there was like this second tier of analysis that we would have in certain classes where we were reading narratives where we'd say, okay, well, like, what was the context? Was he in a teepee or a wigwam? Or like, what was important to Native Americans in the 18th century and blah, 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 blah. And then I remember going into this Derrida course and him analyzing things by saying like, well, why did this person choose to use the letter T next to the letter O? It's a phallic symbol next to a vaginal symbol. And why use a semicolon here? And why do you think he, used papyrus instead of this or that and the other? And I was just like, I was like, look, man, sometimes people just want to write down that they ate dinner and went to bed, and that's it. That's the point of the story. Like, you can analyze your way backwards, which is what we're seeing from the left. And hiding it under the veneer of being an intellectual really plays to their narcissism. And if there's one common element I think I see among these psychopaths on the left, is that it's this narcissistic, I know better, and I have, I want to paint with a broad brush. Not only do I know what's best for me, Chris, I know what's best for you. I know what's best for the nation. Things that I would never say. I don't know what's best for anybody other than myself. And even that, I'm trying to figure that out.
Even worse, I'm going to make you responsible for my reactions to your words. And you don't know me. You don't know what childhood I had or what my mom was like. You know none of that, but you're still responsible for that.
Well,
if I get triggered...
That's like this, making misgendering somebody a hate crime thing, that was why Jordan Peterson took such an exception to that decades ago, because he realized that if Ontario was going to legislate that, that basically you become submissive to somebody else. Someone else is taking your freedom of speech from you, and so everybody has to have their own God-given rights and their freedom of speech together. It's not my job to make your life happy. It's my job to pursue my own life, liberty, and happiness, just like it's your job to pursue your own life, liberty, and happiness. So they've got everything backwards like that, and hiding everything in jargon and under Ivy League degrees and under Pulitzer prizes and Nobel prizes. It just gives them a false sense of gravitas, as though when at the end of the day the ideas are just as idiotic as they sound. Not prosecuting crime to fight crime. That's not a solution. That's a non sequitur. Go ahead.
They're getting desperate now, though, is how I feel, because they've had their little world. They've been able to sort of construct their narratives and their abstractions, and they've been able to push stuff pretty far. They've even gotten, drag queen story hour for 5-year-olds. They've done some things, right? And they've gotten there. Now people are pushing back. And I'm really worried that we're getting into what the Saul Alinsky phase of this, which is the reaction is the target. They're going to goad people until they do something and then say, oh, we had to respond, right? They don't care when it's Antifa BLM burning down Kenosha, Wisconsin, and taking out, beauty parlors that belong to minorities. That doesn't bother them in the slightest, right? But, if you walked between the velvet ropes, in the Capitol building, well, now that's 20 years in prison, right? I mean, so yeah, we're watching this whole thing really begin to break down, but now they're wielding the lawfare in an open way against not just Trump. He's the big visible thing, but after the Trump convictions, I saw no cities burned down. I didn't see any cop cars flipped over.
Right.
I didn't see any of that, right? None of that, right? So there's a very different sort of a response set to that. But even with that, there's at least 400 separate prosecutions of conservative people ongoing right now that I'm aware of.
I know.
And so
and it makes you think, like it's something that I think about when I write or when I speak, like, and I know that, it's disappointing to admit to, but it's done to set a tone, and that's what it does, like it or not. You know what I mean? It sets a tone. It's like, I thought Marjorie Taylor Greene actually made a very good point the other day when somebody asked her about Trump, and he said, well, why are you worshiping a convicted felon? And she turned around and said, George Floyd was a convicted felon. And I was just like, yeah, well, there's just a perfect example of the double standard, right? And I'm not making a commentary about what happened to George Floyd, but, look, if we're going to talk about worshiping convicted felons, I mean, they're building him statues. Joe Biden was just tweeting about him the other day. George Floyd had ushered in a new era of equality in the country or whatever. Look, putting aside whether or not you think Derek Chauvin was guilty or innocent, and whether or not, what your opinion on the death of George Floyd was, the fact of the matter is, if you're going to call out the right for worshiping a convicted felon, people on the left are doing the same thing. And so there's double standards and there's hypocrisy all over the place. I'm sure, it's everywhere. It's with COVID, right? Gavin Newsom was telling everybody to stay home, and was dining at a 4-star Michelin restaurant called French Laundry while the rest
The
of us
laundry.
were
Yes.
at home doing laundry, surviving off of French dressing. We didn't have anything. And he's out hobnobbing with the social elites. I mean, the hypocrisy is. And if you ever notice, like with the autonomous zone in Seattle, none of these things become problems until these protesters show up on the front lawn of the mayor. That's when that stopped. That's when the autonomous. So forget about the businesses and the residents on that 2 or 3 block area that were negatively affected by them basically creating camps in the middle of Seattle. They shut down businesses. They made it difficult for people to get to their homes. Nobody did anything until those people showed up on the front lawn of the mayor. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, things are really getting out of order here. Nobody wants to fund the police until they're on the phone saying, I need the police at my house. And it's just such a silly and stupid way to think about things. It goes to this idea that people don't want to be inconvenienced. I'm going to read you this thing. George Carlin said, he's talking about people saving the planet. And he said, environmentalists don't give a shit about the planet. You know what they're interested in? A clean place to live, their own habitat. They're worried that someday in the future, they might be personally inconvenienced. Narrow, unenlightened self-interest doesn't impress me. And that's what it is. It's narrow, unenlightened self-interest. This mayor, it wasn't a problem until it became a problem. For Harvard, for Penn, it was, hey, let these people run free on campus until all of a sudden they were called to task. And they saw, well, Claudine Gay has been accused of plagiarism and everybody humiliated themselves in front of Congress. Well, now all of a sudden it's our problem. So now we're going to come out and make a statement. Oh, we're against anti-Semitism on campus, whatever. And that's just how it is. It's not a problem until it affects them personally. And that's just, it's sad. And it's an extraordinarily ineffective and dangerous way to think about things if you're legislating.
I have so we've been doing problem definition. I have an organizing theory to all of this, which is that we are biological creatures, and biological creatures are finely tuned to their environments. And so when the Serengeti dries up, the wildebeest have this instinct that says we better get out of Dodge because we're running out of food. We better go to the next valley, right? So humans, well, there's no next valley in this story. And so here we are, and we're at the tail end of an exponential fiat debt-based money system. And it is whether we know it intellectually or we know it in our hearts, that story is breaking down. And it came with some fat, easy times, dude. There's nothing an organism likes better than a free lunch. We've been having our free lunch, pushing it all off to the future, kicking the can. This is why I've been screaming about every Fed chairman since Alan Greenspan. Because when you look at the system, you see that they're just driving us towards a really bad outcome, right? And they've been doing it because of that narrow, unenlightened self-interest, right?
They don't want to be inconvenienced personally, and they don't want the shit to hit the fan on their watch. They don't care.
That's it.
They don't care if the system doesn't work in 100 years. They just don't want it to fail while they're there, and that's what they're doing. So they take a 1 day,
Yes.
1 week, 1 month, 1 year outlook instead of looking what's going to be the best for the country in 100 years or 200 years.
Yeah, and what's going to be best for people as yet unborn who I've never met and never will meet, and because I have a duty and an honor as a member of my tribe to think that way. It's not it. So we don't have that. So we got all these narcissistic gaslighting, all this and that. So maybe this is just the tail end, Roman Empire, Nero. We're in the Nero Caligula phase. That's just how things go. All right. How bad in your mind is our fiscal monetary situation right now?
Look, it's certainly unprecedented. If you try to take my subjective opinion out of the equation, which really is, I really feel like we're stuck between a pretty big rock and a hard place here, and you just try to look historically for some type of precedent, there really isn't one. Our debt to GDP is, at record levels, something like 34 out of 35 countries that have had debt to GDP as high as we've had it have not made it out. The one that did, I think, without either default or hyperinflation, the one that did, I think, was Japan, who basically has stood stagnant. Their market has done nothing over the last 30 years. And so I think that the check is finally coming due here. And let's just go to instinct, like you're talking about. Right, $320 million over the grand course of our, $3 or $4 trillion in tax receipts is not a lot of money. But when you see something like this pier out in Gaza that cost the Biden administration $320 million to build, so ostensibly they could bring aid to the Middle East, and it's constructed hastily and was never meant to withstand 3-foot waves, which are, from my reading, the norm there.
Do you find those in the ocean? Is that
3-foot waves? Ask any surfer. You could pretty much get a 3-foot wave anywhere. But to see something like that built and then drift out to sea, break and drift out to sea in the span of 12 days, and it's just $320 million that has just gone. Like it disappeared like that. It's like the money we're sending to Ukraine. It's unaudited. We have no idea where it's going. It's tens of billions of dollars. And when you think about the juxtaposition between the excruciating amount of energy that is spent managing tax receipts from the citizens of the country, right? I mean, tax season basically gives me a panic attack every year because I'm wondering if there's some $600 thing that I forgot about that is like, that because everything's tracked now, right? So there's no point in being a tax cheat now. The government knows where all your money is. It knows what you're spending it on. It knows, where you're moving it to. But like to think that they are relentlessly kind of fixated on the excruciating minutia of the income of the middle and lower class and what people are making, what cab drivers are making, what waiters and waitresses were making. Back in the day when I was a bartender, we used to love cash tips because we didn't declare taxes on cash tips like many people in the industry didn't do. Like it was just it's the norm in the restaurant industry. Now I would be scared shitless to do that. The excruciating amount of energy that is spent managing on these tiny, minuscule sums of money. Say you're paying 30% on $600. Okay, whatever. Like, what are you talking about? You're talking about $180 in tax receipts? Okay. Versus the complete lack of visibility on where billions and trillions of dollars go, trillions of dollars in assets missing from the Pentagon, hundreds of billions of dollars being sent overseas without audit in the form of foreign aid, $320 million floating out in the Mediterranean Sea over the last couple of weeks. So when you look at that juxtaposition, it's very difficult to make any case other than we really are kind of, it's almost the equivalent of like looking through the couch cushions for change while running up, all of your credit cards at the same time. It's like one isn't going to justify the other, and it shows how twisted our focus is right now. But the country has a spending problem, and setting monetary policy aside, if you just want to look at fiscal policy, and if the country has any hope of returning to any type of fiscal normalcy or not running this thing off the cliff, which ostensibly would result in either the death of the dollar or a sovereign debt crisis, they have to get spending under control. They have to stop spending. And they are not even telegraphing that. If I was the Biden administration, at least I would be jawboning about maybe cutting back spending, which is a precursor to actually doing it, which takes balls. So I don't expect either party to do it. But at least telegraph that we're going to be responsible about it in the future. And they haven't even done that. To the best of my observation, our country's fiscal policy appears to be, F it, we've come this far. We're going to YOLO the rest of the credit card regardless, because we can. And we're going to hope that it's just one more straw on the back of the dollar being the world's reserve currency that is not going to make it break. And so I'm frightened really by, if the nation was a country, if the nation was a company and you were a financial analyst and you were looking at, whether or not to invest in it, and you saw, that the leverage continued to, increase, and the country's net profit, ostensibly their tax receipts minus their spending, the deficit continues to widen, it would be trading as an equity stub, meaning it would be trading as like essentially a call option. Like, yeah, maybe they'll get it together, but it's really not looking that good. And so the fact that anybody can look at our nation's financial situation now and think otherwise, to me, is baffling, and it's worrisome. It's not in my control. So I
don't think it's recoverable.
It might not be, dude. It might not be.
I don't think there's any combination of tightening our belt or any. I think it's too far gone. So, if you go to the Federal Reserve website, Fred, St. Louis, right, and you type in TCMDO, total credit market debt outstanding for the United States. That's its acronym, TCMDO. We're over 100 trillion now. The world, last I saw, which was 2018. I don't know how often they added up at the BIS, but at that point, it was $315 trillion of debt, not underfunded liabilities, none of that crap, just straight up debt. So, rounding, the United States has 30% of the world's debt. We have 5% of the world's population. So now the question is, well, what sort of industrial powerhouse, super move are we going to be pulling to judo our way out of, that particular leverage cycle? And we don't have a plan. Well, you know what we're doing? We're racking up more and more and more debt on a year-over-year basis and shrugging our shoulders and calling it a day. That's our plan.
We don't have the productive capacity to do that.
It's our plan. Our plan is no plan. That's it. There is no plan.
Correct.
So I don't even care if you got an RFK in there or some superhuman. I think we have a math problem, and I think it's just a question of when. We have a wounded elephant that's walking, but it's dead. Right? That's where I think we are in the story.
I think if you had some common sense people in office, I do think there would be a path, because I think once you start to change the trajectory of things, that, because markets are forward-looking indicators, I mean, a lot of things would break. You'd have, foreign currency markets break. You'd have some commodities break. I don't know what would happen. It would be unprecedented, but I don't think it's impossible. I think that if me and you took an hour or two, we could sit down and probably figure out how to cut the nation's spending by 25% in a way that is not going to make a material difference to anybody who walks out their front door at the end of the day. There is so much.
Well, we're deficit spending 6.8% of GDP right now. So first up, you'd have to accept a fairly punishing recession, right?
Right.
That would be part of just to get to a zero balance. Second of all, you mentioned taxes. I don't know when this happened, but over the past year, I've been like, screw the taxes. Like, I'm really against taxes. I really think I want to go back to the original thing. Government, you get some excise taxes and that's it, right? Just attend to a couple of things and we'll call it, no, you shouldn't be in education, housing, all the rest, forget about it. Not yours. But even with that, our whole cycle of, it's the money system itself. So this is where I've defaulted. You want to know, before I did the crash course, Chris, the title of my whole series was called The End of Money. And the reason was I had analyzed way back after reading G. Edward Griffin's, Creature from Jekyll Island, understanding the exponential function. I just puzzled it through and I said, wow, this money system is destined to fail. That's all. It's nothing personal. It's destined to fail. But I've since matured that. And I'm sure I'm going to really enjoy my next reading of Hayek and all, because I'm sure it's all wrapped in there. It is impossible to have an honest, non-corrupt society built on top of a corrupt money system. That's my ultimate conclusion.
For sure,
that's why we money system.
Well, that's why the dollar used to be backed by silver and gold, and that's why we had things like the debt ceiling. The point of those things were guardrails to prevent us from doing exactly what we're doing now.
I mean, can you imagine if Mike Johnson says, it's really important. I personally think we should send another $100 billion to get, evaporated in Ukraine. We're going to need 2 ounces of gold from every household. Mail them in by next Friday, right? It's a very different conversation.
Very different. It's a very different conversation, and it doesn't happen, and that's it. And so you have unchecked power in the hands of very, very few people. And even more nefarious is the idea that the consequences of their irresponsible behavior are not obvious to people. I mean, it's become obvious now because inflation, even the government's rigged inflation number, has gotten out of control, and so it's kind of made its way into the public discourse, which is nice because it's creating some accountability. It's also raising a lot of awareness with people that otherwise wouldn't understand it. And the other nice thing is, you have the advent of Bitcoin, and regardless of whether you like Bitcoin or not, or you believe in it or you don't, it started a conversation about monetary policy that I think is going to benefit the nation. But yeah, the consequences of money printing show up in the form of a loss of purchasing power, which the everyday individual doesn't see right in front of their faces. I write on my blog that inflation kind of works in the dark machinery of the night. Like you have your money. If I put $100 on my desk here, I can wake up every day and look at $100 and I can tell myself I still have $100 when in fact the purchasing power of that 100 is eroding. I just can't see it. If we had some giant visual indicator of how our purchasing power is being zapped on a daily basis, it would be way more evident to people. But that is kind of what has enabled, this policy to continue, is the fact that most people don't understand that it's widening the inequality gap, that quantitative easing widens the inequality gap, and that it zaps your purchasing power at the same time. And that's what makes the whole thing really kind of nefarious on its face. It allows kind of unchecked, gives unchecked power to very few people, and this is as it relates to our monetary policy, to our money supply, like you're saying, broken money, with consequences that homogenize kind of over a longer period of time and a larger group of people. Meaning, if the government prints $5 billion to give to whatever, the bagel industry, that the consequence of that $5 billion that goes to benefit bagel manufacturers gets homogenized over 350 million people that are dealing in U.S. currency. So, I pay 0.0001% of that in my purchasing power, and the giant liquid pool of purchasing power gets diluted a little bit and recalibrated in a certain way that I'll never feel in any kind of meaningful way. And that's what makes the whole system really ugly and really nefarious.
Well, it's very regressive. Of course, it hurts people. And I think people have started to have that direct visceral experience with it, right? Because you go to the grocery store. You can put $500 in a grocery cart now without really breaking a sweat, right? You can do that with off-brand name stuff. Your auto insurance mysteriously goes up 19%.
Remember how hard that shit was on Supermarket Sweep? Remember our Supermarket Sweep? If they wanted to ring up 500 on Supermarket Sweep, they had to take the cart directly to the expensive meats and cheeses, and they loaded the whole cart with meats and cheeses. And even then they brought it back. Maybe they got $200. Now it's like you walk in, you buy one cookie, one roll of toilet paper, and it's $1,000.
I know. It's really bad. It's really bad. And so here's the thing I feel bad about is this new crop of youngsters, right? Gen whatever, we're up to Z or Z plus. They're on TikTok and they're just crying, right? They're like, how is this supposed to work? Because they're fed this bill of goods, right? I feel really bad about this, right? Think of the narrative they're supposed to ingest. Hey, permanent record, you got to do all this stuff. You got to get perfect grades. You got to go to college. You got to do all this stuff. And then you get to join the game. And they're like, but the game's rigged against me. I'll never own a house, right? I don't need, like, these people are like I'm earning more than my dad ever did, right? And I still can't afford a place, right? It's just like the whole game was rigged against them. And I bring this back to Ben Bernanke said, you know what? It would be a real shame if all the people who already had homes and were living in them, if they saw the price of those homes go down. So tell you what, let's just buy mortgage-backed securities. Let's cram mortgages down. Every percent we bring mortgages down puts an extra 10% on the price of houses. And that's good because it creates this thing called a wealth effect. Like we were talking, Ben Bernanke and his bunch of egghead PhDs at the Federal Reserve had this idea, this abstraction, that there was this thing called a wealth effect in a house, but they never stopped or thought or even talked to somebody to say, and what's the effect of pricing out the next generation?
Right. What about the people that want to buy a house?
What about them? What about them? It's not about them. It was never about them. So I actually think that, amongst the many wars we could see, which is left to right and, rich, poor, the other one is a generational war. That's the other axis on this, where I think young people are perfectly entitled to say to boomers, what the F were you doing? And why didn't you put any thought into me?
Well, yeah, hopefully there'll be some people in the younger generation that have the wherewithal to understand it. because it also becomes, when you remove the incentive from the system, which I think is like happening now, that the incentive to go to college is less and less. The incentive to sit at home and wait for a handout has become bigger and bigger. And so when you do that, when you remove the incentive to earn a living, or people just surrender to the fact that, all right, I'm never going to own, I'm always going to rent, this kind of slippery slope of quality of life getting worse and worse as the generations move forward, it becomes extremely regressive. It's like a slip towards, socialism. And, we're still very, very early on. So I walk outside my apartment here in Philadelphia. I mean, the world seems to be functioning pretty normally. You got cafes, there's no bread lines, there's businesses booming, people are working, and, I got doctors walking around in scrubs, and, Uber drivers, and, the world is functioning on this, crony capitalist system that we have here. But we're not moving in the right direction. We're not moving to a freer market and a more vibrant economy. We're moving towards having less, a diminishing quality of life. Michael Saylor just said this on my podcast, talking about the difference between pre-war homes, which were built like, brick shit houses with bricks and concrete and big old lumber and 2x4. And, now how new homes are made, which is, all right, you staple a couple pieces of drywall together and you tell people they're living in a home, but what's the quality of that home versus the quality of a home, 50 years ago? And that's happening with everything. It's happening, and we're seeing it with shrinkflation too. It used to be $1 for whatever, a 20-ounce box of cereal. Now it's $8.99 for an 8-ounce box of cereal. And then the packaging changes. I buy a lot of Hershey's products because I like to eat chocolate. And I've noticed the difference over the years, and I buy a lot of M&Ms too. I like them too. You notice the difference over the years where, like, you have one size of a package that maybe it's like 20 ounces and it's $4.99, and then that goes to 20 ounces and it becomes $5.99, and then they don't want to raise the price anymore, so it goes to 18 ounces and it stays at $5.99. Then it goes to 16 ounces and it stays at $5.99. Then it goes to 14 ounces and $6.29, and they got to put something on the bag, like share size or, carry-on size. They come up with some marketing bullshit to make you think that we've invented a new size here for your convenience, that you're paying a lot more to. Then they get to like this breaking point, whether it's, 10 ounces for $6.99, where they have to reset and go back to the larger package, which they then label as like the party size. So they got to hike that all the way up to $13.99, which was essentially the same thing that you had to begin with. And so it's the shrinkflation as it relates to prices, but also you see it in diminishing quality of life too. It's the same exact thing. What I have here, this 400 square foot palace that I live in, this is going to be considered living in opulence and luxury probably, 20 or 30 years from now. And so you make a good point there.
Yeah. So, well, let's remarket your 400 square foot. We call this the Philadelphia estate. It's
charming
size. Charming.
One of the few with actual brick, divider walls, whereas, everybody else just has brick wallpaper. Now, those are actual bricks. You can go and smack them, and that's it. Shit will crumble off of them,
But you don't have to listen to your neighbors every word. You have to, maybe shouts get through, but not the whole conversation.
Yes,
so that's a good thing.
And the leaks that I get down the adjoining wall are part of the charm of the building. You just wish that new school buildings leaked like mine does.
Yeah. So in terms of the organizing principle, so we talk about all these things with the Rubik's Cube facing us where we're looking at it as rational people. I can also rotate this cube, Chris, and I say, if I don't try and make sense of what these people are up to, but instead I assume that their intention is to attack my country and intentionally wreck it, it all fits, right? The borders, the attacks on the children, the monetary, like everything. Like if you have a paradigm, it means that you can predict things, right? And so the paradigm I have is whenever they have a choice between doing something I would consider the right thing or the wrong thing, it's invariable. They'll take the wrong thing every time.
Well, it does. It has certainly moved me in ways over the last few years that have never been moved in before. I mean, if you had talked to me 10 years ago, I would not, the last thing on earth I would tell you is we're in the midst of a giant existential struggle between good and evil. I'd be like, well, that sounds like a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah,
But I gotta say, I think about those things now. I think, all right, are there like good forces and bad forces? Like, because there's been too many instances. It's like the EUA thing with the ivermectin. It's like, all right, well, here's the solution we plug in that makes everything that just happened make sense. And that's like what you're talking. And you don't want to admit it, and you don't want to think that way. But it's just, look, we're having Pride Month here in Philadelphia, and I think we are all over the. Although it feels like every month is Pride Month, but apparently this is the official Pride Month right now. And as far as I'm concerned, I want people to live however they want to live. So if you are into men, women, whatever you're into, I'm fine with it. Like I have a lot of gay friends. I have transgender, customers that I used to wait on that I'm friendly with. I want everybody to do what makes them happy. Having said that, when I walk down the street and I see, people waving rainbow flags, like, okay, fine. They're, having pride in their sexuality. There's nothing wrong with that. But then when I see like a 50-year-old guy waving his dong in front of like walking in front of, 9-year-old children, to me, that's very different. To me, there's a big difference between having pride in your sexuality and exposing yourself to minors. And I feel like, why is it difficult for people to see that line? Like, if drag queen story hour, fine. It's not something that I would be anxious to have my children participate in. No problem. Everybody's got their own standards, of whatever they hold acceptable for their family. I don't care. That's fine. No problem. Having kids put dollar bills into the garter belt of a drag queen who's stripping, that's a little bit different. There's a reason that I couldn't get into a strip club when I was 18 years old. And trust me, I tried when I was younger. But like, there's a reason I couldn't get in until I was 18 years old, because it was, it's a strip club, and so those lines are getting blurred now, and it does kind of like make me think, like, how do people like not see this? And you can do this with anything. You can do it with ivermectin. You can do it with, our monetary policy. How do people not see that, decriminalizing crime is going to increase? How do people not see that handing out needles is going to increase drug use? And you do kind of start to wonder, you start to ask bigger questions, and ones that I can't obsess over, because I want to enjoy what little time I have left here. I mean, I can observe about it, but I mean, after our interview today, I'll go running and I won't think about it for the rest of the day, because it becomes very bothersome to think about it in the way that you're talking about. And at some point you have to make a choice. And I hope I don't sound like, a coward. And I hope I don't sound like somebody that's part of the problem, or like just another useless automaton, lobotomized automaton. But like, at some point I can't obsess over it any longer, because it would just drive me mad. And the fact of the matter is I'm 41, and if I've got 25 good years left, that's great, and I want to spend them in some type of peace of mind. If I had children, that would be a different story. I think I would be beside myself, but I don't. And so, sadly, to some degree, I throw my hands up in the air and say, well, this is going to be somebody else's problem, and maybe I'll finally get some good sleep once I'm dead.
Well, Matthias Desmond says that we're in part of a mass formation or a mass psychosis, right? And it ends in atrocities usually, unless you're careful, right? And if you don't want atrocities, you're going to have to fight, right? In some way, but resist in some meaningful way. And so I think that's what a lot of the people, we'll call our side of the truth movement or whatever, they stood up and said, this is crazy. This doesn't make sense. This, you just ask the unanswerable question, and that's how you break the psychosis, right? This guy's like giving you all this stuff. Oh man, I've joined this amazing group and it's awesome. And it's got this guru, and like, dude, I think you might be in a cult. Like, no. It's just, we took vows of celibacy and poverty, right? I'm like, yeah, but why is the guru riding off in his Rolls Royce with your girlfriend?
Always, yeah. Always.
You ask the question that has no good answer, right? Like, why are you as an OBGYN recommending this untested shot for pregnant women who we never did this before this moment in time? And what would your culpability be if that outcome was a stillbirth or a malformed child or somebody with a lifetime of disability as a consequence of that? Are you picking up the tab? Who's picking up that tab, right? There's questions you can, but it takes bravery to ask those questions, right?
Yeah, it does.
Same thing. I am all about, like, I'm such a libertarian. I don't even care, Chris, if people want to do drugs. I just don't. Like, until you say you insist that my kid needs to do drugs with you, now I have a problem, right? Until you drag the kids into it, I'm usually pretty cool with stuff. Or
we're funding it.
Or we're funding it, or in some way, it crosses over and touches my nose in some way. And then, but I mean, that's just normal stuff, right? Inside your own home, you be you. I don't care. I don't care, right? So,
yeah, I'm the same way.
That's not where we're at, right?
No, it doesn't seem like it.
They want you to fund it. They want you to be okay with it. And they want you to repeat their little mantra of okayness with it because you have to participate in this. And I'm like, some of that looks healthy and some of that looks like mental illness. And I'm not going to participate in the mental illness part. And I'm not going to pretend I am.
And they're running out of ways to, like, fund these idiotic ideas. I mean, we're not really funding them. We're printing money and, running up a huge tab. But they're grasping. I just wrote a couple weeks ago about Biden now wants to tax unrealized gains.
I know.
Which would be a surefire way to torpedo our economy. I mean, the people that would be... So taxing unrealized gains means that they're going to tax gains on capital gains that haven't been realized yet, meaning if your house appreciates in value or your stock portfolio appreciates in value, but you don't sell them, you're still getting taxed on that appreciation. And then if they come down after that, you can't write that off. So you're set, or you can only write, now you can write off capital gains to $3,000, big deal. But that is such a terrible idea because it will take the people that will hit the hardest are the ultra wealthy, the job creators, and those people will leave the country immediately. They're the people with the means to leave the country as quickly as they want to, many of whom probably already hold dual passports. And so we would see, first off, not only is it brutalizing on the middle class or anybody that is trying to, save money or anybody that has a 401k. I mean, not only is it just absolutely, it's burdensome and it's just, it's overbearing and it's just terrible. It's a boot on the neck of everybody, but everybody that it affects the most, the people that the government says they got to pay their fair share, they're out. They are out if that happens. And if they leave, they're taking their jobs and they're taking their companies and they're taking their wealth with them. And it's just a surefire way. So we're scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of not just ideologies to subscribe to, but ways to implement them. And we really, it does feel like the left has overplayed their hand quite a bit. And it feels like we're getting to a point now where a lot of people are just, I mean, I just don't know. People look at Joe Biden and say something like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. And they don't understand that that's like a racist thing to say. I mean, it's just becoming so obvious that they're really just kind of rubbing everybody's nose in it at this point. And I think that is going to beget an awakening that is probably long overdue, that's coming to like a fever pitch, that it will be reflected in the vote in November.
It's very well said because, full confession, I didn't really do the whole pro-vax or anti-vaxxing. I was kind of like, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it until this whole COVID jab thing came along, and then it unpeeled. And now I've gone full down into all of the studies, right? And I'm like, okay, well, now let me look into the MMR and the this and the that. It's a horrifying, it's just as bad as you would imagine, right? And you peel down in there and you're like, this is all built on sand. There are no studies that prove anything anywhere that you can they build fraud on fraud on fraud. And then they work double overtime to hide any of the bad side effects. And they push it off into this victims compensation fund, which never pays anything out, right?
And then you bring Geert Vandenbosch on to talk about vaccination and how, vaccinating through the variants could actually make things worse, and you're the asshole. Like you're the conspiracy theorist. I listened to that interview. It was exceptionally eye-opening, and you look at his track record and you look at his pedigree, and the fact that somebody like him just gets written off it's stunning.
Yeah, no, that's the age we're in. But then at the same time, they're saying, "Oh, follow the science. I am the science," right? Says Fauci, right? All that stuff, So it's insulting and degrading. But I do think that when we rotate that cube and say, "Okay, we're just under attack," part of my paradigm, Chris, is that when they do things, it's intentionally demoralizing, not depressing. Demoralizing. Demoralizing is when your cognitive map and your reality aren't lining up in one shape or another. So you heard it here first. We saw that they started to throw Biden under the bus with, oh, he might be slipping a little behind closed doors, right? That's the limited hangout. He's gone by August, right? And the question is, who's the most demoralizing person you could think of for them to hot swap him with? And that's the answer for who they're going to come up with at the DNC convention.
I don't know. I mean, they're going to lose if they keep him in there, so I'm hoping they keep him in. But I can't imagine being a Democratic strategist and not focusing every day on how I'm going to get him the out of there. I mean, he is a nightmare. He is an absolute nightmare. The only worse candidate that I can think of than him would be Kamala Harris, because she is also clinically insane. First off, she's a bimbo. I mean, she's just an idiot. Not for nothing. I mean, she can't put a sentence together. She can't put a thought together. I have no idea how she made her way.
I love her. I actually love her because she reminds me of being in college about 4 bong hits deep into a conversation where you're trying to talk about a subject you don't have a grasp of yet. Yeah. Astrophysics, freshman year, 4th bong hit. That's what we're talking about.
We need to be unburdened. We need to. What does she always say? We need to be unburdened by the past. Burdened by the future. She says the same shit at everything.
Because the time was then, and the time then is not the time now, and the time now is not the future time. That time is then. Whatever she says. That's great.
What is he saying?
Awesome. No, not her either. So to me, the most
when they're stoned, he's like, dude, maybe we're just all salt on God's pretzels or something. It's just like, wow, very deep.
If the Democrats were actually still Democrats at all, right? Obviously, they've got RFK right there. He's a solid candidate. He espouses everything that they traditionally used to stand for, but he has integrity, which means he's a no. So they got to go with somebody else.
I thought Dean Phillips was good too. I didn't mind him.
I don't know about anything. I don't know. Haven't tracked Dean Phillips on that at all.
Just seemed like a centrist.
Yeah.
Some things I agree with, some things I don't, but I can take that. I just want a normal person.
No, they'll give us Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, and Hillary Clinton. This kind of our holy trifecta of choices, I think.
They're saying Michelle Obama's not going to do it. Gavin Newsom, his track record in California is going to be a big Achilles heel for him. And I think Hillary Clinton would just be... I couldn't script it better. If they put Hillary Clinton in, I think that would be great. I think she would get demolished. And so I'm trying to think, if I was a Democrat, who I would run. Probably Michelle Obama probably has the best chance against Trump, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something like that. But I think it would just, at any rate, crazy times. But at the same time, I'm of the mind that most of that's actually still a distraction. I know it's important, and a lot of people take it important. I don't, because I think there's this deep state that in my entire adult life, Chris, nothing has changed, right? Same foreign policy, same not putting the bankers in jail, same, increasing encroachment on the rights and freedoms of the little people, same failing to hold themselves to the same standards of accountability across both parties. Like none of that's actually completely independent so far in my adult life of presidential candidate. I think you'd have to have somebody in there with complete stones and who really knows how the game is run. And I think RFK could potentially be that person, maybe, right? But he's got a weird Israel policy as far as I'm concerned, and he's got his scritchy moments, but at least he understands what he's up against, right?
I mean, isn't it funny you say like the same policy with regard to the bankers? Like, isn't it funny that nobody went to jail over 2008? Like Bear Stearns blows up, Lehman Brothers blows up. You have all these people shuffling around these toxic assets, lying about it, talking about potentially trillions of dollars in wealth destruction globally, and nobody goes to jail for that. And Trump Trump gets found guilty on 34 counts over $100,000 and a totally legal NDA that he has his lawyer sign for him like 10 years ago. I mean, like, that just tells you everything you need to know. You don't even need to like. You don't even need to like Trump. It just shows you what the double standard is.
Yeah, no, they spent $34 million investigating the blue dress and $15 million, pinky to mouth, investigating 9/11. It's like all you need to know right there. It's just one of those things. So, all right, well, this is the end of our time. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to many more conversations. Where can people follow you? I know you mentioned it, but let's do it again.
I'm most active on my Substack. It's called QTR Fringe Finance, quothetheraven.substack.com. I'm sure you can put the link in the description. There's a paid option, but you don't have to pay. There's a free option too, and I publish a bunch of free stuff. So you're more than welcome to sign up there. And that's it, man. Just great to talk to you. I can't wait to have you on my show.
I can't wait either. I can't wait either.
It took this long for us to talk to each other. And let me just say before we hang up real quick. Yeah. Hand to God, anytime I've written about COVID over the last 3-4 years, I've always acknowledged that you were on the forefront of calling out what was going on. I'm not talking about like vaccine skepticism. I'm just talking about the fact that COVID was pretty much a foregone conclusion that it was going to affect the United States. It was just a China thing for a while, and it was on the news, every day. First, it started on the crawl on the bottom. Actually, it was coming up on the Bloomberg terminal. 10 cases in Wuhan, 20 cases in Wuhan. That was in late 2019. Then, a couple people started to get sick in Milan. There was, weird pneumonia spread. And then around the holidays, there was a lot of air travel, but, it was, we had one case in the U.S. and whatever. And there was nobody back then that was pointing out what I thought was the obvious trajectory for this, which is, hey, everybody's traveling here, and if it's in China, it's already in the United States, and it's going to spread. And I just remember you as being one of the few people at the beginning of 2020, late 2019, when I was going to Sherwin-Williams stores and buying masks because we didn't know what the hell it was. Could have been a bioweapon, could have been anything. And I remember going to my local food store, buying up all the hand sanitizer. I remember just being people looking at me like I was absolutely crazy. Nobody had heard of it yet. Nobody knew what it was. I remember tweeting out a pandemic preparedness checklist that people were calling me a fearmonger. I had one guy whose wife was a nurse in Queens find my phone number and call me and scream at me on the phone like randomly. You were one of the only people back then that understood the potential trajectory that we were on. And, my thought process is always, it's better to be safe than sorry. And what happened 2, 3, 4 months later, people are in food stores, they're fighting over toilet paper, they're, all the shit that so I just want to let you know that between that and you always hosting Dave Collins' Year in Review, which I read every year also, I've followed along with Peak Prosperity, and I'm on your site, and I love your Twitter feed. And so, the truth is, you earned my attention from having the foresight on that issue. And I just want to let you know that, I appreciate it. I appreciate being on, and I'm really glad that we got a chance to talk to each other. You deserve a lot of credit, is what I'm trying to say.
Thanks. Thank you for that. And as you know, credit is hard to come by from the center of the system, right? But, I get a lot of credit from the people I care about most, such as yourself, people who are able to listen to it. And listen, it's a real labor of love, creating content. So for beginning COVID, starting on the 23rd of January, for 6 months straight, I did daily content, Saturday, Sunday, daily. It was just daily. And it was like 30, 45. Each one of those things could have been a college course, right? I would research, I would stay up all night, I would read papers, I tried to understand what's important, what's not important. So that's my superpower, is making sense of lots of incomplete information in real time. That's that's where I live.
It's wild that people like ourselves can hash out and look, I work in finance, so my job as an investor is to get all the facts on the table and try to objectively understand if it's a good or a bad investment. If I think it's a good one, I want to hear the worst argument against it. And if I think it's a bad one, I want to hear the best argument against it. And it's not until we have all of the objective data that we can arrive at, what the best practice is for us, for our family, for our community, for our nation, for our state, for all the people that we care about. And that's all we want. We want peak prosperity. We want to, protect ourselves, protect the ones that we love, and we want to have best practices just in life in general. We want to be patriots. We want to be responsible citizens. We want to be good members of our community. And the only way to do that is to fearlessly look at the objective facts as they come in and try to make decisions with critical thinking in real time, which sometimes means having the courage to press against whatever the narrative is that we're told. And I was doing the same thing as you in December of 2019 and January 2020, which is just, scrambling for data to try to put together, how I felt, which, being ahead of the curve had its benefits. When the market crashed in March 2020, I was already thinking this isn't going to be that big of a deal, because I already seen the data out of South Korea and Italy, and I was saying, hey, it's probably a spot to buy the banks, buy whatever stocks here, there, and the other. So you get a lot of credit for having that foresight and for kind of fearlessly approaching that, and that's what makes your content valuable. And like you said, it's a labor of love for me too. I joke on my blog all the time that I should be paying my subscribers. They shouldn't be paying me, because I feel cathartic. I feel like I'm having a therapy session when I get on there and write this stuff. So, as much as I appreciate you and appreciate your audience, I appreciate that people also kind of gravitate towards alternative media like ourselves to get their information. I think it's just gonna, everybody wants the same thing: peace, love, security, community. That's it.
You know what? That's very well said. And you know what we should do this year for Christmas? We should chip in together, and we'll send fruit baskets to the Washington Post and CNN for being so terrible, but giving us the opportunity. Like, thank you so much for being so lame at your jobs, because it's meant a lot to me, and I mean that.
I'd rather donate to St. Jude's or Children's Hospital Philadelphia, and maybe you can match me on my minuscule donation that I make during Christmas.
Absolutely. Love to do that.
Beautiful.
So thanks again, and looking forward to the repeat of this on the other end.
Absolutely, brother. Thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Take care.